Hello and welcome to all the members of the Alliance and the Horde. I'm Joe, here with me is my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
Today, we are not going to be discussing just any character of the Warcraft universe. We're going to be discussing the legend, the man, the titular character of this video, Khadgar. Khadgar is one of the most interesting characters in Warcraft. Taken in by the Kirin Tor at a young age, Khadgar proved himself a very gifted pupil, and at 17 years old was sent to apprentice under Medivh. Medivh ordered him to clean the library, as he had many other students who had shortly afterwards left his service. With Khadgar doing so, I wonder if he paused and got lost in the library, just reading and reading and reading like he did in the movie, where he just seems almost, to his mind, like the library is a church. Which, being a bookworm, I get that. Khadgar, though, eventually had a second run-in with Medivh, who attacked him, having forgotten who he was and that he was even there, and accused him of thievery, only to then realize, oops, this is my apprentice. Khadgar, for his part, had previously thought of Medivh as a simply eccentric and weird old man. It was only now that he had an inkling that something was off beneath the surface. The two soon took off for the south after Khadgar got a quick griffin riding lesson from Medivh, and they had their first encounter with the orcs. The thing is, it's there that they also ran into Anduin Lothar. With Khadgar learning about Medivh's past, Medivh, for his part, played along because he was keen to buy time for the Horde. Being a traitor and all, it's hard work. And in this situation, we can already see one major problem for Khadgar. Lothar isn't thinking about Khadgar or his situation at all. I'm not sure he fully cares if one goes by the depiction shown in the movie. And that's that essentially this is forcing Khadgar into an awkward position of, essentially, child parentification. Khadgar is to become, for his mentor, a bit of a surrogate parent, rather than being the child. And this is never something that's very healthy, and it only ever leads to conflict between parent and child, or master and apprentice. And the trouble is, as in the case of what happened with Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi in the novels, eventually when Obi-Wan had to deal with some child parentification, it leads to nothing but trauma and tragedy. Khadgar, though, upon his return to Karajan, would start to prepare a spell over the course of several days, and would get to see the battle between Egwene and Sargeras, with him then afterwards, with Khadgar participating in an investigation into the deaths of Hugarin and Huglar. He would discover that Medivh was actually a guardian of Tirisfal, a lineage of very powerful mages, and that there's something going wrong with Medivh. And at the time, he didn't immediately become suspicious that Medivh was being influenced by Sargeras, but he was becoming increasingly suspicious of his master's actions and motives. And he would later end up meeting Garona, of course, and with her aid would unravel the plot that Medivh had set in motion. And the two would hurry off to go plead with Lane for assistance, and they would return along with Anduin Lothar and a group of soldiers to combat against Medivh. So our previous statement about Anduin Lothar not really being present, or at least not playing as much of a role as he did in the movie, is false. We made a mistake there. But as we explained in our video, or I should say stream, for over Warcraft's, the first part of Warcraft 1. That is, this is a learning experience for us. We're not as familiar as others with the lore. But that said, mistakes like that need to be corrected, and it will be commented on in the next Chronicles of the First Wars video, because it has to. When we make mistakes, we admit to them, and we come out about them, because there's no point in lying or grifting about it. Just be honest when you make mistakes. That's my motto. And of course, we've discussed in both a stream and a video, or two videos, all about the battle between Medivh and Khadgar. And it really does boil down, for the most part, to Khadgar versus Medivh. To an extent, Lothar does play a minor role here in comparison to Khadgar. And this battle is really about the mage, who is cursed to age before his time. So by this time, he's probably in his late teens, maybe early 20s, and he is stripped of his many years of his life and forced into the body of an old man, older than even Medivh. This was a cruel act. Probably the cruelest in Warcraft 1 and 2's history.
Very self-centered and narcissistic on Medivh's end.
Yeah. Khadgar, of course, defeats him because good always wins. I'm just going to say. And Garona, being nearby, allows Gul'dan to enter the mind of Medivh, who had begun to be violated and possessed by his master, Sargeras. And Khadgar then deals the mortal blow to Medivh, thus wounding Sargeras, comatizing Gul'dan, and taking down Medivh. 3 for 1! Something which only the greatest Alliance hero of all times, Khadgar, could accomplish. Because he's the greatest. I partially kid, but also it's kind of true. But that aside, what does this battle mean for Khadgar? It is essentially the son having to disown the father and take him down. But as Medivh lies dying, stricken and broken by what he has become, and by the traumas inflicted on him by Gul'dan and Sargeras, the scales fall from Medivh's eyes as he realizes what he's become. Now, in the film, the reason Medivh does what he does is that he has become influenced by his desire to see his daughter, whom is Garona. He wanted to reunite with her because he lost the woman he loved, who was Garona's mother. And in that regard, there's a fairly sympathetic reason for why he does what he does. But on the other hand, he is also filled with a jealousy and envy for Khadgar. Because Khadgar, let's be honest, has more potential than him. And Khadgar is the next up-and-coming great wizard. Khadgar is going to one day be the Guardian. And he is probably going to be the greatest Guardian of all times. And Medivh begrudges him this. And this is why he curses him the way he does. But it lies in his relationship with Khadgar that he can find his redemption. Because it is, despite this hatred and jealousy on his end, Khadgar forgives him. In almost every depiction I've seen, in Medivh's last moments, Khadgar is filled with pity and sympathy. And in the movie, it's great because he doesn't say anything really. He just looks at Medivh with just utter compassion and sympathy. And you can see that Medivh is shocked by this compassion because he's been abusing Khadgar all movie long. And yet, he can't hate Khadgar. Because in some ways, this is his son. He may have shunned him and abused him, but his son still honored him. So that moved, he, not in so many words, but does ask for forgiveness. And Khadgar gladly gives it. To which Medivh passes on grateful but also broken and filled with horror that he could have ever harmed this young boy who just simply loved him and wanted nothing more than his love. Because in the movie, Khadgar is disowned by his family because he wanted out from the Kirin Tor and just wanted family. He wanted to be almost like everyone else. But the trouble is, they couldn't accept it. So he's essentially an orphan. He has no one. And yet he had less than even Medivh, but he still had it in him to forgive Medivh, proving he is better than Medivh in every way. And to be quite honest, Medivh is not worthy of his forgiveness. And he realizes it. Especially in the classic lore when he curses Khadgar. And yet, Khadgar still fully and willingly and happily forgives his every sin. And I find that a beautiful story. That's the sort of story we ought to be passing down to our kids. That is, honestly, one of the greatest moments in all of Warcraft history.
I know I wouldn't be able to forgive him over that. I mean,
he cursed you to lose all the years of your life and to become an old man.
Trying to destroy the kingdom and everything? Yeah, sure. But
to suddenly become like an 80-year-old in 5 seconds. You've lost your entire life there. But what do you think of Khadgar being able to forgive?
Incredible.
Yeah. But the sad thing is, on Medivh's end, he's destroyed his own legacy. Because Garona is to be tortured to death because of his actions. Let's go with the theory that she is his daughter. His lineage dies with her. And Khadgar, whom is his adoptive son, for all intents and purposes, has been stripped of the years of his life. And given that Khadgar loved Garona, he's not going to get with any other woman, so there goes the last of Medivh's legacy. But Medivh did it to himself. That being said, it is Khadgar who is left to pick up the pieces after Garona and Medivh and Lane's deaths. And it is incroyable that he could lose so much. I mean, let's see. In 24 hours, or 48 hours or so, he loses his father figure, whom he also found out turned to the dark side for all intents and purposes, had to slay him. The woman he loved suddenly went berserk and killed his king. And then she was tortured to death by Orgrim Doomhammer. And yet, Khadgar had no hatred to offer up to her for her betrayals, to Medivh for his curse, or even to Doomhammer for murdering the woman he loved. That is incredible. You gotta hate someone. Anduin Lothar sure does. He hates Doomhammer. He hates the orcs with a burning passion. Same with Varian. Same with almost every other character, but not Khadgar. Instead, he approaches Garona's betrayal in almost a methodological manner. He approaches it more from an analytical perspective, going, okay, how and why did this happen? And he continues to investigate more on a Sherlockian level. At the same time, with Orgrim Doomhammer, he doesn't seem to find there's any reason to hate. He just proceeds with his duties, regarding it as, I'm opposed to him because of duty, but I'm not going to hate him. Therein lies the path to madness. I just find Khadgar an incredible character. He is truly the nicest guy in Azeroth. Now, in the movie, he also puts up with Anduin Lothar's nonsense because Lothar is a drunkard and a fool who essentially has the mentality, what do you need books for? Just go hiking. He's essentially Gaston. And he deals also with some verbal abuse from the not very bright cheerleader, Garona, who's, I just call her a cheerleader because she's basically a pom-pom girl going for the jock. That is her character in the movie. Now, there is more to her character in the movie, but that is essentially the dynamic. And let's not pretend as though she's terribly intelligent in the movie. She isn't. I find in the game she's smarter than she is in the movie. Although, that said, in the game, she was possibly sleeping with Lothar, Lane, and Khadgar. Man, she gets around. But on Khadgar's end, he's simply doing his job. And he is genuinely trying to help people, and he is genuinely compassionate, both in movie and game and books. But I don't think he's much liked by most of the staff, as they don't have much interest in pursuing his character or his journey. And Medicine seems more interested in Medivh, and seems more interested in, of course, the boring character of Thrall and the I don't know how to describe him, Varian. I just say I don't know how to describe him because Varian's a difficult character to describe, which is why I actually like him more than Thrall. Thrall, he's Green Moses. That's all there is to him. He's perfect. And I find that the difference between Thrall and, say, Khadgar is Khadgar suffers, makes mistakes, makes miscalculations, and the characters always get hard on him for his mistakes, but he takes it and keeps carrying his cross. But there's an admirable story to Khadgar, and he is a flawed character, but he's also a flawless one in some ways. But he's not treated as a Mary Sue like Thrall. There is a lot to say about him as a character, and there's a lot to praise about Khadgar. And I believe he's also your favorite character.
Yes.
Why is that?
An up and coming young bookworm mage taking down those adversity.
Oh, such a great deal of adversity, yeah.
And I'm a sucker for coming of age stories.
In some ways, though, he's a very different character from the likes of, say, Harry Potter or Taran.
Definitely.
He's got the same sort of interest in a, well, female lead of sorts, but he's ultimately much more cerebral, and at the start a lot more timid and quiet, but also there's a core of strength and analytical brilliance to him. He doesn't win by virtue of the author helping him out like Harry Potter. He doesn't win by virtue of relying too much on his friends, no offense, like Taran sometimes does, where it's not really Taran's victory but his friend's victory at the start. It's not like, say, Simon Snowlock from Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, where it's more the victory of his impulsive courage. Khadgar is more like Obi-Wan Kenobi in personality, very kind and generous, but also analytical and resourceful. He doesn't win by virtue of bashing the enemy with overwhelming power. He wins by virtue of cunning and resourceful skill. He's probably more like Matthias. Matthias is a brilliant character in Hero and Redwall. Very cunning and resourceful. Khadgar's a lot like that. He came at a time when, honestly, some fantasy heroes were becoming more clever. But not really in books, because outside of Redwall, book fantasy characters were becoming dumber. You need only look at others in the 90s. Case in point. It was a dark age of fantasy in a lot of ways. Except for video games and movies. Those were still shining true. But Khadgar is a perfect example, an embodiment of all the positive traits of a male hero. Except he's not a sword-wielding guy, he's a wizard. And he's not a impulsive hothead like Orphan from the Orphan anime, who was a great character, but honestly, you could sometimes forget that he's a brilliant mage because he's such a hothead. With Khadgar, he also endures something that not even Orphan could. Tragedy on an untold scale. He endures as only Obi-Wan could, in the model of a stoic hero in the likeness of Marcus Aurelius. Essentially, he epitomizes the phrase, so long as it is within your power, be good, and do not live your life as though you were going to live 1,000 years. Death hangs over you. And these ideas are epitomized by Khadgar. So that he truly is the ultimate hero of the Alliance. He embodies their every virtue and value, but none of their flaws, which makes him really interesting. He is, however, naive and often seems to trust too much in the wisdom of his peers, who have neither his intellect nor his wisdom, which is also why he's probably the greatest of all the Guardians. And I do consider him a Guardian. I know he officially turned down the title, but he is the Guardian after Medivh. And I think he is the greatest because he didn't try to become a one-man show or one-woman show like Egwene. He didn't become obsessed with his own legacy and his own image like Medivh, but rather he's obsessed with protecting the people of Azeroth. And he regards it as his duty not just to protect the Alliance, but also the Horde. So it doesn't get much more dang heroic than him. And I'd argue that I do hope that whatever comic book runs have come out over the years and books about the original Warcraft game are about him. He should be the star because he is the best character of the first game, at least on the Alliance side. I'd argue on the Horde side, it's Doomhammer. But Khadgar is also a brilliant scholar. He's just utterly funny in the movie because he also, as said, makes a beeline for the books where you have him told, all right, guard the area and just don't move. Go straight for the books. And the funny thing is that most mentor characters are like, keep yourself busy while I'm off talking important stuff. And they go up and away to go hang with the important wizard character or whatever. Most heroes are like Terran or Harry are like, Terran would, of course, quickly find Alonwi so you could get into a verbal...
Spat?
Yeah, but it's basically his verbal makeout session. Harry Potter, what I hated about him was you put a book in his hand and he shrieks with horror and runs the other way. How did he ever become a hero? Like, he's such an idiot. Khadgar makes the beeline for the books, looking enchanted, and like every book is a treasure made of gold. And this is a major difference in the type of mage characters that they are. Harry represents the decline in the fantasy genre. A character who reviles learning and knowledge and wisdom and is essentially Gaston in a drag. Whereas Khadgar represents more a male Belle in a way. Eager for adventure, but mostly just eager to help others. And always with a book in hand. That said, his lack of defensive spells when he first comes to confront Medivh is also a fatal flaw. I'm not sure what he was thinking when he led the troops into the Karajan, because he probably should have had at least some defensive spell prepared, but he doesn't. And the minute the curse is flung at him, he seems the most startled person in the room by it. Yeah, okay, it's, oh my gosh, what have you done to me? But there's also, come on, dude, you have to have known he'd chuck something at you. I think on some level he wanted to trust that Medivh would hold something back, and that there had to have been a bond in there between the two. Essentially, it was the child thinking, no way would my parent ever turn on me. I know he's abusive, but he's my parent. Not so. But he wins the battle due to his virtue and his brilliance. And in the movie, this is well shown. He wins by cunning and resourcefulness. On the other hand, he starts off the battle a little foolishly when he's in hiding, just telling Medivh, shut up! And blasting him with a spell, only for it to be rebounded back at him because Medivh's not foolish. And Khadgar had a blonde moment there. Sorry, I shouldn't say a blonde moment, but like it was such a dumb moment, but it's so funny. Now for relationships. In the movie, he seems to be looking for a father figure in either Medivh or Anduin Lothar, because he's been disowned, and this is fairly realistic. The only thing is, he does not receive undue amount of child parentification for just Medivh. He also has to basically play child parent of sorts to Anduin Lothar, which, oh my gosh. And watch as essentially his father figure goes for his girl, which that's all sorts of unhealthy. And I say his girl because whatever. It's a love square. It's such nonsense. But if you go by the books, I believe there's something going on between Khadgar and Garona, just as there is between every male character in Garona, except for Medivh, it seems. But that's her dad. Which the bond between Khadgar and Garona adds a different element to his relationship with Medivh, because this is now his father-in-law on top of his adoptive father. The trouble is, I think it adds in a way to Medivh's disapproval for Khadgar. This is my daughter and you're getting with her? How dare you? But Khadgar doesn't immediately know that it's Medivh's daughter. So that would add drama and pathos there to that relationship. Well, more drama and pathos, which I do like. As to Khadgar and Lane, one thing I didn't like in the movie is just how Lane doesn't seem to care about Khadgar. He's like, okay, he's just a mage, whatever. Whereas from what I read of the wiki, it seems like there was trust and possibly even liking on Lane's end towards Khadgar. I'll have to read more. When we finally get to the comics and the books, hopefully they'll showcase at least some sort of relationship between the two men. That said, I wonder what Lane would think of Khadgar being made to do child parentification. Now, lore-wise and sort of thematic-wise, this is following in the footstep of Tolkien in a way. Because the last major story which had child parentification of such a corrupted father was of the Feanorian children with Feanor, where you have Maethros and his brothers forced to basically babysit their dad after their mom eventually got sick of it. Who could blame her? Feanor is the most brilliant elf who ever lived in terms of scholars and inventors. The trouble is, he's rather emotionally unhinged and a little mentally unhinged. It's kind of like Medivh. But the difference is the Feanorians, this kind of drives them a little bonkers and eventually leads to their deaths. Whereas with Khadgar, he handles it pretty darn good. But I don't think Khadgar has any other real major relationships outside of those we've highlighted. Might also be interesting if ever he interacted with Varian when Varian was a kid. Maybe, well, yeah, we've basically covered, I think, everything up to the point where we're at in Chronicles of the First War. I might not lean towards going much further because this separate character playlist is meant to more follow the characters and discuss the characters as we're going along with the Chronicles of the First Wars playlist. Next time we'll probably touch upon maybe someone like Doomhammer, because why not? He's my favorite. And him and his hammer are my favorite. I'm joking. But any last thoughts regarding Khadgar?
No.
Alright, well, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were Khadgar taking down Medivh, Sargeras, and Gul'dan in one fell swoop.